I'm good with that. Try to
Well,
ignore the crazy puppy in the background.
okay. Now, it's been probably a year. I think the last time you were on was episode 357, 367, or 347. Something with the seven and it
Somewhere in
starts
there.
with the three. So we're,
All right, fair enough.
but what has changed in the past year? Any big changes?
Um, with me, basically just the big title change, I think. Other than that, life seems to be going in a similar route as it was about a year ago. The biggest difference is we have some new animals, so we're training some younger kiddos. I've done a little bit more rehab and dabbled in some different things. I'm going herping more now, which is a really fun word that basically means we go out and look for reptiles and amphibians. Um, Boyfriend and I actually were able to extend the range of the Sierra newt because of doing that. So that was pretty cool.
Now, when you say extend the range, does that mean it's now more capable of being found? Was it close to extinction? Was it?
So basically, California Fish and Wildlife has this big map of where different species are found. And when we went herping at this waterfall, we found this Sierra newt, checked out the map to try to ID which newt we were seeing, and ran into some trouble because we were IDing a newt that they said wasn't in the area. So we basically submitted, hey, we saw hundreds of these guys in this waterfall, and they were able to take their chunk from being this big to being this big, which hopefully is a really good sign for amphibians in the area. So
Now, so
it's
because
pretty cool.
last time I have not listened to our last episode. So last I remember is that your
Mhm.
goal was to go to Africa to help out a certain species of rhino. Now, has
Yep.
that changed at all from trying to do, getting a little bit more into herping or where you're at now?
It hasn't changed. The difference of what happened was actually COVID. So I was supposed to go to Africa this past October. So at this point, I would have actually already gone. Unfortunately, because we had to keep pushing it back and back and back, I did not end up going. So it is rescheduled for this February. Um, Although a little bit of a different twist on what I can do, because originally I was going to volunteer at a rhino sanctuary. And I'm still going to do that, but it'll be a different sanctuary. So things are still similar at the base level, but they're different on the deeper level, I guess, if that makes sense.
Is that still?
COVID's ruined a lot of things.
Yeah, I totally forgot about the pandemic.
I
But
guess
yeah,
that's what happens when you have a career behind a computer, anyways, right?
but it's kind of crazy with that in the first place. I mean, do you feel like you still want to do that, like go help out with rhinos, or do you feel like just with your new capabilities now being a senior, you said senior zoo? I'm gonna say officer, and I know that's not your title as officer.
Senior animal trainer.
Senior animal trainer. So like
Yeah.
more on, are you working personal more now? Like do you prefer that, or instead of more of an educate? Because I get it, like educating kids is fun. It's nice to get a kid interested when you see their eyes light up towards something, but
Yeah.
especially if you're able to extend, like, start picking up certain things about different species, or starting to be able to discover more and enhance your own knowledge, has to be a benefit
Mhm.
too. I mean, that seems more interesting than, not saying teaching kids is bad, but after a
Right.
while, it's like, how much can you really go when it comes to, I want to learn a little bit more?
Right. I feel like I have this never ending issue with I always want to do more. I want to do more. I want to do more. And so the cool part of being a senior animal trainer is that basically you take on this new responsibility. And the responsibility I took on was our aquarium and amphibians. And that's a beautiful thing because a lot of our conservation efforts actually go into that specific area. So the little conservationist in my heart is feeling a lot happier about that because I get to make some pretty big calls about like salmon and red band trout and stuff that are actually critically endangered. Um, as for the rhino side of things, I don't know if you recall from a year ago, but the reason I actually even started working with these smaller animals in the first place is because I had an injury at a previous facility. And so my thought was, I'm going to come to this facility and I'm going to heal, and then I'm going to go back to the rhino game. Um, Whether or not that is still in the docket is still a big question mark for me. My body has decided that it doesn't want to heal as fast as it wanted to.
Well,
So
you
I'm
had a
not sure.
serious injury. You didn't have like,
Yeah,
you got to explain your injury to people again for new
that's
listeners
true.
listening, but you from what I remember, you were hit with something in your calf or your thigh.
Pretty close.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it was
Mhm.
not like, oh, I fell off my bike. It was like I was pierced with something. And then now I have to learn how to like rehab it a little bit.
Yeah. So, for those of you who have not heard me before, I actually was injured about 4 years ago by a Red River hog. Those are the 200-pound African boars with tusks. I actually got attacked by two of them at a previous facility, and they ripped out my quad.
Oh, I
Um,
still get chills.
yeah, so there's a nice big hole in my leg for a pretty long time. I was out of work for 6 months. I was only allowed to be upright standing for 5 minutes every hour. I was on crutches for 12 weeks. Um, so basically, from going to my specialty being in pachyderms, which is your giraffe, your elephants, your rhinos, hippos, and
Possum.
lifting 80 pounds of bales of hay into these exhibits, I all of a sudden couldn't lift 25 pounds above my head because my leg is no longer usable. And so, in the colder weather, I'm still very much like tightened up from that. I can't lift what I used to be able to. And everyone always told me when I hit the 5-year mark is when I'm going to like level out and figure out where I can be and where my, I guess where my career leads will be at that point. As of now, it's not getting better. So I'm doing a lot of physical therapy, a lot of that yoga and stretching. But if I can still do the rhino thing, it would be great. It's still a hope and dream of mine. I just am trying to be a little bit more realistic about this time around, if whether or not it'll be full time or it will be every once in a while I can travel somewhere and help them out. So that's kind of where I'm at now.
What's interesting is my thoughts that probably came the last time we talked came in first to my head, but then I start looking at like the fact that you are perfect for what you're doing right now because you got injured so badly and you're still doing it. Like how many fighters, for instance, in MMA continue to fight long after like an injury happens or choose to coach, find it in a different form. You haven't really lost the passion for it. If you talk to most of the world, if they do something like, I don't change light bulbs because of the fact I was burned really bad as a kid from trying to change a light bulb. So it's like
Yeah.
you start to realize that you actually are probably meant for this in so many ways. I mean, you haven't lost the caring aspect for things. It might take in a new form with, you might have to put some goals on hold or something like that, but still the fact of like, you still love being around animals when a lot of people don't even want to volunteer at an SPCA to be able to, just put food in a bowl because it's a heavy task. I mean, for a lot of people, they're very, very self-involved. And the fact that you can show that compassion to animals is just another factor of what makes you fit for what you're doing.
Yeah. And what's kind of nice is I think that a lot of people are animal lovers. They understand a lot of what I'm coming from, where it's like, I love these guys. I spend my weekends and my holidays with my animals. And they're like, yeah, we get it, but I don't want to do it. So they always get that like base level understanding of like, we get why you love them. The interesting part about that, though, is it's not even just my career. This morning I was telling you one of the reasons we were kind of struggling to schedule this podcast is because I volunteer on my days off. And so I'm off right now on Sundays and Mondays, and most of Mondays I spend it at Tortoise Acres Rescue and Sanctuary, just volunteering to help these tortoises that are unfortunately needing to be rehomed. And some of them are pyramided like crazy. One of their shells is just like twisted because people aren't caring for them. Every Thursday evening, I go out and I check nest boxes for Audubon, hoping that we'll see a bluebird egg this week. But, it's one of those things that when you find your passion and you let it drive you, I think that a lot of people would end up in a very similar situation if they ended up with the time for it.
We need to put you in charge of PETA. I'm telling you, you're doing way better efforts than they are. Than when I talked about this
Fair.
months ago, but when they said they're going to ban animal slurs, like you can't say kill two birds with one stone, it's feed two birds with one scone. I'm like, there's fucking birds that are dying from people encroaching onto their territory. There's conservation efforts that need to be fought that aren't being fought. It's like, just give me 1 month as your job title, PETA, and I will
Right.
fucking do some actual work rather than ban them off animal
Yeah.
crackers. But it puts into a perspective because I started trying my hardest, and I actually have a new mascot for the podcast. It's the Dodo Bird, because I was
Nice.
looking through a bunch of animals and trying to figure out what have we thought of that has now changed on the base efforts of things we found in ice during the like glacial periods, things that we thought were true that weren't, because I was noticing so much of it throughout the world. I was like, I thought that was a thing. Oh, it's not. Okay, so there's new information out now. And the dodo bird,
Hmm.
so everyone thinks it's this dumb flightless bird, and it turns out it was actually or originated on this one island, and these settlers came over, and this, they don't think that it was actually stupid. They think it was actually just, it didn't have any predators, it didn't have any, like, there was just this bird on this island, this small little island. So they weren't used to something foreign, so they were curious and very open, like pure, kind of not fearful and hiding in corners. And they met these settlers.
Yeah.
And after a while, these settlers decided to kill and eat them, to where they hunted down the last one out of extinction. And I'm like, fucking, I was raised in school to think this bird was the dumbest thing that ever existed. And that's why we call it a
Mhm.
dodo. That's an offensive thing to somebody, is calling them a dodo. And I'm like,
Yeah.
just shows what people aren't really knowing about animals, what people aren't really understanding about how
Yeah.
the world's working today. I mean, I've talked to a couple people that are falconry people that, like, have their own
Mhm.
falcons, breed them for hunting and all these types of things. And then people that are also doing conservation efforts to be able to help these birds as well too. Um, it's just so fascinating how little your scope of view is when you are just
Mhm.
confined to what you see on the TV, what you come across on your social media. And I'm like, the algorithm should be pointing you in every direction. I mean, my algorithm's crazy. My algorithm is ex cult people versus priests versus this, that.
Yeah.
And it's all over the place. And I'm like, this gives you the full scope of view of what are you interested in? What should you know that you don't? And a lot of people don't know about like the
Right.
animal conservation efforts. I mean, I've talked to a few herpetologists, and they talk about like there's all these little buggers that they're finding that no one even takes a second to stop and look and understand. There's a little life that's growing under your
Right.
shoe right now, and all you want to do is throw a cigarette butt out on it.
Yeah. Coming off of Earth Day just a few days ago, that's like a really great topic because first off, I want to hit on the PETA thing because I totally agree with you. They always fight the wrong fight. But bringing it back to like even the dodo bird, where I feel like there's just so many animal myths out there. Like how many people listening right now have always heard that opossums play dead and that they can hang by their tail when in fact none of that is true and you want them in your backyard because they eat 2,000 ticks a year and eat rattlesnakes. But all you think about is, oh, my dog's going to get rabies, so I don't want it in my backyard, which is also not true. They can't even get it. And
I
so
blame Ice Age. That movie's got some flaws to it.
a lot of those kids movies do. But I have to say, when you come to like leveling animal intelligence, I always like to think like everybody knows that elephants are intelligent. But if you told an elephant and a monkey to climb a tree and the elephant couldn't do it, would you say that it's stupid? No, it's just not capable of doing that. So what you were talking about with the dodo bird is so similar to what happens in the Galapagos Islands. The Galapagos Islands is incredibly protected. And so when visitors come, they can lay on the beach with a sea lion. They can walk right up to a Galapagos tortoise. And just because they're not trying to kill you doesn't mean they're stupid. It means that they've, over many, many years, learned that we aren't terrible to them. And what's happening in the United States is that they're learning that humans kind of suck, right?
Yeah.
And so you're noticing that a lot of species are actually even changing their sleep pattern. Animals that previously weren't nocturnal are shifting in the evolutionary train to be nocturnal so they don't have to be around us. So, they're learning to live around humans just as hopefully we're learning to live around them as well. It's a very interesting topic. So I have to appreciate you for grabbing the dodo bird on that. That's pretty cool.
I mean, just a few weeks ago, I was driving my car and I almost hit a deer. And my thought wasn't, "Oh my God, I almost hit a deer." Because I mean, this thing scrunched its butt up like a cat does when it's like purring back, and just missed the
Uh-huh.
front of my car. And I'm like, I started thinking, I was like, imagine that being that deer and just being like, where the fuck's the land? Why am I on a road? Why is there cement under my feet rather than looking at
Yeah.
the land of things? And it's like, I started watching like a meat versus vegan debate on
Mhm.
YouTube. And I was like, they're not, vegans aren't wrong. Meat eaters aren't wrong. You guys have your own points and stuff too, but nobody's
Mhm.
talking. Your guys are very, very argumentative towards each other because
Right.
you guys are so, they're passionate about it, which I get. But there's points on all sides here. There's no one that's not wrong
Mhm.
here. It's just kind of like you have to understand that everything that I'm seeing nowadays is being built up exactly like the home beside it. And there's a lot of these empty homes that are just being built and destroying land. Where I think last time we talked, there was a small community that was built near my buddy's house, which was miles and miles of forest. Now there's like a very small little piece of forest, and all these homes that are built up, all these communities don't have anybody living in them. They're just there for sale. And I'm like, what was the point of this? Did you think
Right.
people were going to move down here? Because it's the middle of fucking nowhere. And you
Yeah.
start to realize, like, I mean, I can see the points on maybe an overpopulation of things, but I only see it in the aspect that we're taking so much and we're not giving anything back. I mean, there's a small group of people that are fighting the efforts for it, but just think in the grand scheme of things, the one major company that you look to for the protections of animals is fucking PETA. And that happens to probably be one of the worst representations right now, which I think they could do better, but they're not doing what they should be doing when it comes to what about
Mhm.
some reptiles? What about things that are like that? I had an issue that I think got highlighted to me when Elon Musk sent his whatever he called his number 9 rocket or something up, and it was
Yeah.
supposed to re-enter and exploded. And everyone's like, well, we'll get it on the next try. Keep your efforts up. I'm like, that's positive. And then I saw a comment from a herpetologist that was like, what about all the animals that were in that area that like, because they clear out the blast zone. They got someone with a magnifying glass looking all around and stuff. But this rocket didn't land in the blast zone. It landed farther way down the thing where nobody checked. And that just
Mhm.
murdered that whole area of growing life for a very long time. And I'm like, this
Mhm.
is shit we need to be focusing on. I understand the fact of, yeah, we're gotta progress human race, but we're destroying everything around us. And listening to that documentary of the Dodo Bird, it was animated, so I'll give that guy a lot of credit. That was a very amazing. It made me cry a little bit. That's
Yeah.
why he's my mascot. But I was watching that. I was like, oh my god! Like if we went to a higher being and asked the higher being, what do you think about the human race? And the thing goes, you suck, because we kind of
Yeah.
suck a little bit when you
Yeah.
really start examining like what we're taking for granted.
Yeah. I always joke that humans are parasites. And like, if there is an option, I wish I didn't have to have my job. I work with basically only rehabilitated wildlife that cannot go back out into the wild from random things. I have a falcon that was hit by a semi truck, a vulture that was shot, all these things that they can no longer return to the wild. And so, it's like, I wish I didn't have to have my job, but returning them to the wild is not an option. Um, and even when we're talking about like PETA being the representation, I will give humans a little bit of a positive there, because I feel like at this point in the game, at least for our generation, people are realizing that PETA is not great, and they're not donating money, and they're not like bowing down to their every will. Granted, a lot of people still are, but I feel like the internet has opened up eyes to a lot of things. And so there was like this documentary that came out about SeaWorld, and now everyone's like, I hate SeaWorld. And we're like, really? Because they save hundreds of thousands of animals every single year. So please don't listen to everything you hear. You want to support the good guys in any way that you can. And I will say, things like US ARC, which is your reptile guys, and the AZA, and all of these different things are representing the right facilities and the right communities in the correct light now. But now it's kind of fighting against, a lot of the millennials are like, yeah, let's save the earth, let's fucking go, but we're still fighting against the government, who's like, that doesn't make us money though. So, and unfortunately, I have not wanted to be a political person my entire life. I was like, I want to stay out of this shit. And then I realized how many environmental things can't happen unless laws are passed. And now it's like, well, now I have to be in politics. I have to be involved, because how can you love the environment and want to make change but ignore the government. It just, unfortunately, that's like how the US works. So being back in the Paris Treaty, like I have to say, I know Biden's not doing like all beautiful things, so I'm aware of that, but he is at least an environment lover. And, you know, on Earth Day, they actually said science is back in the White House because he's like, we're fixing climate change. Let's bring down our emissions. Let's get back in the Paris Treaty.
Yeah,
And so it's like, you can hate on whoever you want, but we have to have the right government in order to make environmental changes.
the issue with the climate change thing is I get what they're guising it as, but they're also they're trying to cut off a lot of where we get our oil from. We are a giant oil and coal manufacturer, but we also have lobbyists in other countries, which is why in our COVID bill, $850 million went to Pakistan for transgender studies. And that was like, wait a minute, you're only giving us $1,000-something for stimulus. So by 2030 is they want to cut off all our oil ties over there. So that's why they're trying to make everything electric. And the idea that it's going to help the environment, which it will do eventually, but it's just like, you're not, you could use that money and fund some of the environmental projects down here. I mean, there's plenty of organizations. I mean, PETA's more likely to put a dog down than try and save it. You know, there's a lot of
Yep.
these. I have my buddy that works at a SPCA shelter, and he's constantly doing this out of the kindness of his heart. He goes, "Yo, we took a pay cut." And I was like, "What's your pay cut?" He's like, "I'm making like $4-6 an hour." And I'm like, "That's still like money,
Yeah.
but that sucks because that's way below minimum wage." He goes, "Yeah, man." He goes, "But they needed food for the dogs and stuff. And if I'm just going to accept what, $12-13 an hour and at the expense of a dog skipping a meal," he goes, "What's the point of me even working here when I could just work at a fucking food line?" And I was like, great point. And here's where these fundings of these things, we're funding so much stuff that doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, they just grew human organs into a monkey. And I'm like, okay, everyone's like, it's so exciting. We're going to be able to grow organs for organ transplants for humans. And I'm like, but do you think that was the first trial that was a success?
Right.
How many fucking went through that? And we have an issue with lipstick on a monkey. You're growing human organs inside of one. That doesn't make sense to me. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm an animal lover, but then I get conflicted when I see a woman like I did today bring her chihuahua into a store with a service vest on. And I'm like, I know for a fact you don't have anything wrong with you. You're doing that because you can. And that is what people see. And then when people see that, they completely toss all these efforts and all these things they should be doing to help the environment, care for our animals. I mean, I think, and I've said this, I think when we talked last, was you need to know where your fucking food comes from. You need to go to a chicken plant. And the reason is not that you're going to change your mind on eating chicken. Maybe for 2 weeks, I was pretty messed up. But you're going to learn to consume less. And this world right now, we have an overconsumption problem in the fact that we're taking way too much land, we're eating way too much, and we're wasting a lot. And you need to balance that out with knowing where your food's coming from. I draw the line at when you're having industrial farming and there's conditions where animals are basically on top of each other and they're going to the bathroom on themselves. They don't have any room to move. You know, we learned this with mad cow disease when a cow started eating another cow and you're like, oh my God, that's awful.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you have them so jam packed together. You're going to start learning these things that you should not be learning because you're taking too much and you're not giving anything back.
Yeah. I actually recently learned something very interesting. So I've been a vegetarian for about 12 years now. And there's this really amazing documentary that if anyone has like even 2 hours to just give to it, it's called Racing Extinction. And they said, and this came out just a few years ago, so the information is fairly relevant, where if every single person would just be a vegetarian for a year, it would be the same as taking all of the vehicles off of the road for up to 3 years. So even if you know you can't handle not eating meat, and I understand that a lot, I have a lot of friends that actually tried to be vegetarian and then their bodies was like, nope, I don't think so. And they would just vomit constantly. And now it's kind of, you know, I've been a vegetarian for so long that if I tried to go back, I'd probably just be really sick. But, you know, I always just try to encourage people, if you can have meatless Mondays, or if you can only buy your meat locally instead of from like wherever the fuck Walmart gets it, right?
Yeah.
You know, just trying to understand that deeper level. They also came up with something really great recently for like the last few Earth days that I really like, which is find your thing. You know, light one candle. So if you find your one thing and you start with one thing, it's not going to feel so overwhelming. So if it's your buddy that really loves dogs and who are being injured, then, you know, you start there and eventually when that feels like second nature, you're just going to grow more and more. Which honestly is what happened with me. I didn't start being such a conservationist and environmentalist until I moved out to California. And for one, saw how beautiful nature is. I grew up in Ohio, so for any of you guys who've been there, you know it's not the most beautiful place in the entire world. It's very flat and it's full of cornfields. And I loved the animals, and I thought that I only loved like the wild exotic animals on the other side of the country or the other side of the world. And then you realize that the US also has some beauty in it. And it's like, oh yeah, like I want to save this. What if this goes away? But you'll just like naturally grow. So if you start with your reusable straws, all of a sudden you've got reusable shopping bags by the end of the year too. We've noticed a lot that people end up with doom and gloom, which is like, why the fuck should I even do anything? It's just going to get destroyed anyways. So trying to like think of your few things that you can actually do to make a difference does make a difference. It's just hard to see it sometimes, I think, for people. So, like even when you were talking about food, that's awesome. I can't remember the last time people have actually even tried to talk to me about what they changed their diet habits of. So
Yeah, I might come off as like a meat guy, but I haven't had red meat in probably a very long time. I live in
great.
I live in a beach town, so it's seafood. If you ask for a burger here, that's like a $10 thing. And to me, I
Oh
was
my
like,
God.
if I eat a burger now, like even a little size of a quarter, I get the worst stomach pain in the world. My body just will reject it. I eat
Wow.
mostly vegetables, but what I started noticing is that the vegetable costs were going up now. Like lettuce went from I think 70 something cents down here to $1.65. And cabbage went up from 79 cents to $1.89. And I'm like, well, now you're not raising the prices of the processed stuff. You're raising the prices of the produce. So now it's going to be harder for a single mother or single father to be able to afford to
Right.
feed their 3 kids or something. So you're not giving any incentive here. And they're like, well, you got to understand Texas and all these places started going through some severe environmental things. And I'm like, then that's not an answer. That's an issue, because that means that those places are our specific growing points. There should be way more closer to here, so the price won't go up. We should have multiple different farms. If you're talking about being able to genetically modify foods, which I think there's a benefit and there's also a lot of downsides to it, but if you're able to grow so much of it, why do we have specific spots that are designated for this? It's like back in the day, Pittsburgh, for instance, why it's like a giant steel mill place is because of its weather. Its weather was so cloudy back in the day, they thought that China or whatever our enemies could not see through satellites, through our weather, through the clouds, to be able to notice where our factories are. So during war times, they wouldn't bomb them. And I'm like, why is Idaho potatoes? Fucking, there can be multiple places that are potatoes. Like it's,
Yeah.
you really start to kind of like question things, and it's
Yeah.
like questioning money. It's like, why are we on a giant floating rock in space and we're using money and I have bills? This is really
Mhm.
weird.
Yeah, it's crazy. I totally agree. And it's kind of funny because as an animal trainer or zookeeper, or probably anybody you guys know in the animal field, probably makes shit money. Recently, in the last year, we just were able to move into our first like rented house. Okay, so like 3-bedroom renting house, and we are just for the first time at the age of 25, we're able to afford that. Um, and it's a
Congratulations.
weird
That is a
world.
big goal.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a big deal for millennials, right? And then my grandparents are like, your cousin was able to buy a house at like 19. I'm like, that's great, but we don't make any money over here. Like,
When I was
because our money
14,
is always put in wrong places.
I'm about to say, when I was 14, I wanted to be a t-shirt designer. Then I started making a bunch of designs, but I remember what my grandpa said, because that's gay. And then I'm like, well, shit, that's like the trend now. If I start up a clothing company, change out of the
Right.
blank to a clothing brand and do the podcast on the side. I
Right.
mean, but yeah, money, trying to live where I live, it's for rent for a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom place is $2,000, because I'm in a beach
Wow.
town. So it's
Yeah.
not cheap. So I've already thinking about moving states. I'm like, look, this isn't my profession. I just do this for kicks and giggles, but I would
Uh-huh.
like to go, to a cheaper place where I don't have to, but the cost to survive right now, even though we have homes all over the place, is ridiculous. And I'm predicting a
Yeah.
housing crash coming soon.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, I'm in Northern California, so it's not the LA prices, but like our house is way cheaper than that. And but it's just, once again, money. It's terrible. And sometimes it's just put into the wrong places. So a lot of people are like, but you take care of like injured wildlife. How do you not get paid anything? And I'm like, that's a great fucking question. I just got like 3 raises in the last few years, and I'm still making a good $5 an hour less than my cousin who just started at like a fast food place, So it's like,
Exactly.
why do I have a bachelor's degree and I'm doing what I love and I still have to like struggle bus at home? It's
Well,
very, and I'm sure everybody listening is probably like, yeah, I feel
let's look in
that.
the eyes of the corrupt government. So let's say the
I
government
know.
looks at, okay, this person's educating people on animals. Oh, that's not going to make me money like Dunkin' Donuts makes me
Yep.
fucking money. It's like that doesn't make
Yep.
any sense. And you really start questioning things. I'm like, man, like is it gonna be even harder in the future? I mean, people are complaining about millennials being home until like the age of 30. And I'm like, because the world's fucking nuts right now when it comes to
Yep.
bills. I mean, just the price of living is difficult. This is why we're entering like
Mhm.
this depression era of things. I mean, a lot of people kids are getting depression younger and younger and younger. And I'm like,
Yeah.
it's exposure to the world. It's everything is just so costly. I mean, the fact that like we joked about, I think last time about a McDonald's salad being more than a cheeseburger. Well,
Yeah.
most things in the grocery store that are very, very bad for you, a Twinkie is still cheaper than lettuce. And I'm like, hang on a second. I should not be able to buy 2 boxes of ding dongs and not be able to afford carrots and celery. That does not make any sense to me if you're trying to create.
Right.
And I get a little bit mad because I'm a bit of a nutrition guy at heart. I listened to a podcast with Dr. Mark Gordon, and he was talking about he works with military people that have PTSD that have literally like their whole legs are blown off from explosions. And he was trying to pinpoint down depression. So, depression is actually very, very linked to your inflammatory system. So, if I offer you 12 donuts, for instance, sounds great. 12 Boston creams or 12 glazed. In that moment, it does. But then you eat the 12 donuts and you feel like crap because you're gummed up now. It's like with WandaVision where you ate the gum and it went down into a system. Same thing with all those just blank starchy carbs. And he goes, the issue is when you're not healthy with yourself, you're not healthy with people around you. You start being mean. You start isolating. You start trying to close yourself off. You start yelling at people. You get angry. More aggression happens. Now, there's 2 giant factors: aggression and then isolation. When you isolate people, they don't want to learn. They don't want to go out and find out new information. Every day you step out of your door should be a new thing that you learn today, whether you find out your neighbor's name is Tim or whether you find out birds aren't real. I've heard that before on this podcast, that
I
birds aren't
know.
real. Um,
Oh man.
how much do you come across that? Because it's interesting.
It's very interesting. Oh, this is going to really make you happy then. I had a coworker in my field, in my department, working with wildlife. And he started talking about a very similar topic. And I was like, we care for birds for a living. Like, there are birds in our care. Am I really going to talk with you about this? This is also the same guy who put a bunch of termites into a jug full of chlorhexidine and wanted to see if they'd end up with powers. So, needless to say, he doesn't work for us anymore.
Oh
But
my
I was just like,
God.
how is this person? Yeah,
When I
very interesting.
when I heard the bird theory, it was from he's a friend of the podcast, I'd say, friend of mine. When I heard it, I was like, is it because it's the sign of like an omen? And if you're talking about simulation, it makes sense. Like birds are omens of death or warning of things happening. He goes, no, they land on electrical wires because it charges their battery. And I'm like, shit, I can't throw a rock at that. I can't
Yeah,
because the way that he's thinking makes a little bit of sense, but in reality I got to pull myself back and be like, I'm not nuts just yet. i
yeah,
need i need a few more years before I enter the crazy Kramer rabbit hole where I'm sticking my hand through my hair.
right.
But
Yeah,
if anything, that gets more people interested in the fact that you got to go and look at birds or take care of birds more because there are
that's
millions
true.
of dollars of technology. I mean, I was talking to, her name is Anna Martinez. She lives down in, oh my God, I think I really don't want to get this wrong. I think it's Colombia. I'm 100% sure it's Colombia, but she works with helping with bird conservation down there and also the
Nice.
hippos. People don't respect our watering holes. People don't respect the process of anything that she's doing to help in these efforts of keeping these animals alive. And I'm like, the dodo's extinct. Yeah, we can bring it back. And that's everybody's thought, is that if an animal goes extinct, we can bring it back. But there's so many animals that are close to being extinct that we're not
Mhm.
going to be able to bring back. We haven't even been able to replicate. You read an article saying we can replicate a woolly mammoth. Yeah, but it hasn't been done before. You can inject the cells into an elephant, a baby elephant, when it's in the womb or something. It might have some features. It's not a woolly mammoth. You're not
Right.
we're not doing that like in the movies, Jurassic World. None of that has happened, and it doesn't look like it's happening at all. So I'm
Mhm.
just saying, keep with what you have. They stopped playing the Coca-Cola, the polar bear commercials because of the fact that it was offending people and people were getting upset with the polar bear. And also it was because they said it's I don't know if you read this article about Coke.
No.
So I predicted this on one of my episodes. I was talking to a guy who lost a bet to me, by the way. He's coming on to eat clam chowder out of a hat. Uh, I list a dumb bet. I'm sorry. When I win, I always want to have like a cool little. And I told him he didn't have to do it, but he wanted to. But I
Good.
told him, he was like, people don't just say something without any evidence. And I was like, I bet you $20 I can look up something about if you drink Pepsi, you're racist. So I just pulled up my Twitter and I read off like 300 tweets. And I was like,
Oh
it
man.
was apparently from a commercial where some person gave a Pepsi to a cop and then it stopped a riot or something. And that's why they were saying Pepsi's right. But Coke had
Huh.
racist stuff too. But 2 weeks after that podcast, we bet that like nobody would do it again or something like that wouldn't happen again. Coke put out a little article for their company saying how to be less white. And it was about literally things that you can do to be less white as a person. And I'm like, okay, that's fucking nuts. But they
Oh
decided
my
to take
God.
off polar bears out of these commercials. Same thing with Santa Claus. They dumbed them down a little bit. They kind of taken them out of some things because
Huh.
it was effective to people that aren't of that culture or don't celebrate Christmas. People that celebrate
Okay.
Hanukkah. And it was like, now you're excluding and now you need to be canceled. And I'm like, the polar bear in the Coca-Cola commercial wasn't about being white. It wasn't white power. It was showing that this animal's in the Arctic, it's as cold. And if anything, it was a benefit to polar
Right.
bears of helping them
Right.
understand that we're destroying their
Yeah.
climate. And now you're taking out all representation of this. So now this animal is just going to get wiped off the face of the earth and nobody's going to even know 10 years from now what the hell a polar bear is.
Mhm. A very similar thing actually happened with SeaWorld 50 years ago. People were killing orcas. And so, granted, I do not support SeaWorld taking orcas out of the wild 50 years ago. But you know what? Zoos 50 years ago were very different than they are today. At the beginning of all of our facilities, they were like for human entertainment and that's it. And now we're like, no, 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 that's not what we are anymore. But 50 years ago, 60 years ago, wherever they're at in their life chain, people were killing orcas like crazy. So SeaWorld grabbed some orcas from the wild, put them in human care so people could actually see them, appreciate them. And they literally saw the poaching of orcas decline so quickly and so rapidly that their populations have actually like risen. Granted, they're not doing fantastic right now. But that's from a number of different things. But when people get close to wildlife and appreciate them and see how cute they are instead of scary, it makes a big difference. But if you would like, I have some pretty good, I guess I'll say interesting to be nice, some visitor comments if you'd like, because this will probably make you laugh.
Visitors at your
Um,
zoo?
yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
goodness. Let's hear them.
Okay, these are good. So I've been in the field for about 11 years now, and I've been in 3 different facilities. And so my very first facility had African elephants, and this woman came up to me with her 2 children, and she said, "Hey, I have a question about your anteaters." And I said, "Well, we don't have any anteaters, but I can try to answer your question." And she was like, "No, no, no. You have anteaters. I've seen them. They're here." And I was like, no,
Okay,
no,
Karen.
no, no anteaters. Yep, yeah, no anteaters. And I was like, well, okay, point them out to me. And this grown adult woman points to our elephants. And I was like, how do you not know what an elephant is? That's like the first animal everybody learns. Yeah, it was pretty terrible.
The size
And
difference, the size, just the
right.
size.
I know. I was like, oh my God. And I had to really rein myself in to not be incredibly rude to that woman because I was like, whew, all right. And then a personal other favorite was when I'm sure all of you guys have seen flamingos stand on one leg, right? They do that. It's kind of like when we lean our weight to one hip, and a lot of birds do that, like a ton. Um, and this woman comes up to me and she goes, "Hey, I have a question about your flamingos." And we're like, "Yep, go ahead." She goes, "How do you decide which flamingo gets a leg amputated?" And I was like, "You think we amputate their legs?" And she was like, "Is it like to tell a gender difference?" And I was like, "No, we aren't amputating flamingo
It's a
legs."
it's a freaking logical. She hit me with that freaking. Is it to tell? When she said the gender difference, I was like, damn it.
Mhm.
Because if you really convince yourself, you can kind of think that. But if you have any level of intelligence, you know that's not true. See, I wanted to be a vet when I was a
Uh-huh.
kid until we put my 14-year-old Dalmatian down, and I saw that the doctor before when they were giving him an exam stuck his fingers in the dog's butt, and I was like, "What is that you're doing?" He was like, "Vets do this with a lot of animals," and I'm like, I'm done. Done with that. I like to learn about them. Specifically, like I was watching a documentary because I watched the Dodo Bird documentary and I was like, what other things do I not know about animals? I'm also a fan of the Colossal Squid, mostly because they were explaining what a theory is of, and this is going to be a little insane, but it makes sense. So if you picture like a pirate on a ship back in the age of pirates, they spent months on sea without any water. Imagine being surrounded by water and you can't drink any of it. That's a big mind screw in itself. But then drinking alcohol is your only source of kind of nutrients when it comes to just a liquid. That they started to realize these kraken tentacles were actually whales' penises when they were coming up out of the water, and they put a picture of one up, and it looked like the picture of the Loch Ness monster when it was darkened out. And they were like, now
That's funny.
imagine you see that and you think it's a giant kraken or squid, which we know they're colossal squids, but we know that they don't really murder people. They actually get into fights with killer whales, which is insane.
Yeah.
That's nuts to me because I would like that they did an animation of it. I was like, yo, this thing is like
Wow.
that. You would think that it would lose, but no, it freaking grabs it, wraps it around, and like strangles it. I'm
Yeah.
like, that's like an anaconda. Not
Yeah.
Nicki Minaj version, actual snake.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But when they were showing the whale thing, like, now imagine you're a sailor and you see that, but you're so drunk, you start screaming Kraken. It causes panic and hysteria on the ship. And now people are falling off the ship and literally drowning themselves. And I'm like, oh my God, like, what? That's a whole entire like stories, HP Lovecraft type stuff is all written about it. And it's like just mind blowing about like you start learning a bunch of stuff. It's like, well, I thought it was this. And then you realize, no, it's actually like this. But what you're taught is this Disney version rather than learning the
Yep.
actual origins of it. And it goes, actually, it's more interesting where I'm like, can you teach the real stuff so we don't have people freaking out about George Washington had teeth of slave teeth? That was a big thing like 5 months ago. And
Yeah.
everyone's like, oh, it's all a lie. I'm like, there was a
Yeah.
point to it, but still tell the real shit. Like, stop.
Right.
Everyone's building up everything in their head one way. And then when you new information or the real stuff comes out, it shatters it. When you talk
Yeah.
about climate change, stop being like when the news for so long did this where they were telling people that if they don't change this by the time we've already passed like 2017, they were saying this back in like 2010, we were going to be experiencing hurricanes and all this type of like California would be underwater, and it didn't happen. And then people are like, well, then everything you say is bullshit. I get the
Yeah.
point behind it is because you want people to act. And the only time you ever get people to act is when we're at the red line because they're like, well, we could stop it before it hits there. No, it has to be there before it sinks in. It's got to
Yeah.
be there. Um, Instead, just tell the truth. Be like, hey, our efforts that are going towards this way, we kind of need to act now. And
Hmm.
when something starts happening like that, like for right now, climate change is real. You probably could have caught me maybe 200 episodes back where I heard Alex Jones talk about climate change and he was talking about all the things that they over exaggerated. And I was like, oh, fuck, if you really look that up, it's all kind of really over exaggerated. And I was like, maybe it's not real. I still believe in climate change. I can walk outside and tell you it was 30 degrees yesterday and it's like 59 today. And I'm like, that's a big fucking gap. Where's spring?
Hmm.
I don't know. Um,
Yeah.
but when it comes to like science, when it comes to everything that's going on, I mean, our weather predictions are shit. And maybe it's not our meteorologist's fault. Maybe it's the fact that our weather is so uncontrollable that we don't know where it's going anymore. And honestly, at this point, it's like throwing a dart without looking at a dartboard, just tossing it up. I mean, back in the day, they had the Falmer's Almanac, which was very, very accurate. Like that they didn't have technology. We have computers and all these things to be able to predict storms, and now storms are dissipating when they're like not even a couple hours after we see them on radar. So it's wondering like, what is this? How is this happening? I mean, I talked to a
Mhm.
volcanologist, uh, back it up, a
Yeah.
volcanologist, and she said her biggest fear is when we see that there's seismic activity and we can't stop a volcano. And I was like, oh, we don't have technology to stop that? And she goes, no. When that happens, my biggest fear is trying to tell people that they need to leave their home that they've lived in for 40, 50 years. And they're going to be like, I know this place. Nothing's going to
Mhm.
happen. And then what happens if it does? That weighs on my
Right.
shoulders. And I'm like, oh my God, like you start to realize like all these people like yourself that are doing zookeeper efforts, that are trying to rehab and at least take care of these animals that might have had a bad run because of some jackass driving a semi, texting on his phone, or some other issue that might have happened. Um, I blame cell phone towers as well too. They're built. I mean, they blend them into trees now. You know, you can get electrocuted from
Yeah.
not charred.
Yeah.
You actually get electrocuted.
Right.
Birds do it. But you're doing something that a lot of people aren't taking into effect, which is that you're also learning more about these, being able to educate about these too, and also doing a lot of what I would say is very, very care work when it comes to just making the
Mhm.
place a little bit easier on them, because now you understand more of the impacts, which I feel like should be taught more than just like this bird eats 5 different whatever. Why don't you teach the
Yeah.
fact that what you're doing when it comes to this is actually killing this little guy's home? Do you want to do that? And it's
Mhm.
so hard to keep that message to sink in, because much like the pandemic in the first few weeks, everyone was like, I'll get your groceries for you. And now it's become, put your fucking mask on. I don't give a shit
Yeah.
about your safety. I'm worried about myself. I'm like, there's got to be a message to make
Yeah.
that sink in for the rest of that person's life or something.
I have been I found a very interesting little Earth Day fact I've been using for the last few weeks that has really been bringing it home. And so I live in a county that is very much not like pro environment. It's not, it's like Hicksville, USA, if California had any, it's right here where I'm living, which is also part of like, this is why I should be here because you guys need me here. Um, but what's interesting is, it doesn't always have to be you're killing this bird you've never heard of, you're killing this frog you've never heard of. Climate change and the way that we're affecting ourselves impacts us too. So I am like doing my absolute best to try to not use single use plastic. And I'm telling you, it's incredibly difficult. I make something called eco bricks. So all of my single use plastic that I actually have to purchase gets cut up and shoved into little plastic bottles. And then we build stuff out of them because I just don't want it back in the environment. Every single piece of plastic that's ever been created still exists in our environment. It doesn't compost. And so what's interesting is, birds use this plastic for nests and they eat it, and marine wildlife are eating plastic like crazy, but so are we. The average human being eats 5 grams of plastic every single week.
Oh,
That's
oh,
40 pounds a year.
I'm so happy we went to this because I just listened to this. Uh Man, I don't want to get her name wrong. I really should give her credit. Oh my God, hang on just one second. She has you. I'll have to send you this podcast, but Joe
Yeah.
Rogan just put it up 2 episodes ago. It was,
Okay.
I mean, a lot of his shit's like car talk, and I'm like, I'm not a big car guy. Sorry to
Mm-hmm.
say, but this lady's name is Dr. Shauna Swan. So
Okay.
what she is an environmental epidemiologist. Um, I think that's how. Yep, nope. I don't know what that word is.
Interesting.
It's not an epidemiologist. I know that. It looks like it though.
Okay.
Her work examines the impact of chemical exposure on reproductive health and child development.
Oh,
So
yeah.
all these little
They think they're
can
gonna Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was saying all these little cans, all these little water bottles. So they started testing, her case study tested levels in 1973 compared to 2011. The reproductive rate in sexual health, at least when it came to sperm count and also fertility, went from 97% to now 43%. So
Yeah.
basically, with all the uses of plastics and all these that we're consuming, it might not necessarily, like, it's minuscule compared to your health, but it's very, very bad for your future generations, your kids, that now they're
Yeah.
starting to see that there's a lot of plastic actually in our bodies. Just
Mhm.
from even when you're born, there's a little bit of plastic. It's actually showing signs of sterileness in men, um,
Yeah.
miscarriages in women. It was so fascinating because I'm like, shit, like, we're drinking out of cans, we're drinking out of water bottles, we're drinking out of so much plastics, even reusing the same bottle over and over again. They told you back in the day, if you let a bottle sit in a hot car, you can get cancer from drinking it, not knowing that you're still getting it, whether you're drinking it out of the plastic or not. That's why she was saying you need to use more glass objects. You need to use these things because
Mhm.
eventually 20, 30 years from now, like, she mentioned, I don't want to say Shanghai. Oh my God, it starts with an S. Singapore. She
Oh,
mentioned in Singapore, there's actually an incentive to have more than one kid. But since their use of plastics has been so high for so long, it's very, very hard to get more than one child. It's just
wow.
because the fertility count is so low there, and it's becoming lower and lower. So where you're at right now and where I'm at, our fertility count is lower than our great great grandparents by a large significant amount. And that's what's
Yeah.
shocking, is that it's seeing that eventually the human race is going to get rid of itself, with the fact it's going to make the
Yeah.
whole entire race sterile.
Yeah. That's literally what I was just about to say. I just read those articles not too long ago. It's insane. We think plastic is this helpful, useful thing that we put everything on. God forbid you buy the loose apples than the ones that are wrapped in this stupid plastic bag. And it's so silly because our brains are like, well, it's convenient. And like, yeah, but you're also murdering a lot of things when that goes away. I always say there's no way. When you put that in the trash can, it doesn't go away. It just gets out of your life for a little bit, but it goes other places. Plastics don't compost. They break down just into these tiny little microplastics. And that's what we consume and what animals consume that tears up your digestive system and your digestive tract. There's been snakes documented eating light bulbs and plastic water bottles. If it's warm, it's probably food, right? And then when they regurgitate it, these poor endangered species are literally murdering themselves because we can't even dispose of our stuff correctly. And then even if it is disposed correctly, where it ends up is hopefully not the waterways, but probably the waterways. And that all circles back. So, the glass and aluminum thing is 100% accurate. You can actually recycle and reuse that. But, once again, using those reusable straws, it's not hard. Just try to remember to bring it, because all of that stuff will come back and bite you. It's
It's
interesting how much we're really affected by it now.
it's kind of crazy because just how what we even we hear that it's a shock to our systems, especially at least for
Mhm.
people that are kind of like worried about their health a little bit, or at least thinking about it a lot more, considering the whole
Yeah.
pandemic and everything. But the fact is, like, even that doesn't stay long. Like, I had
Right.
just the other day at work, there was a beetle on this girl's bag, and she freaked out and was like, kill it. And I just grabbed it with my finger and had it crawl on my finger, then walked it outside. I will admit that when I put it outside and I tried to get off on the wall, it kept not getting off my finger. And then I was like, okay. And I went to move him with my other finger and it flew. And I was like, he could have just fucking flew out okay. He just
Yep.
flew away from me.
Yep.
But it's how instinctively we're like, squish it, do this. And it's like,
Yeah.
why would you do that when you can just easily move it? It's not going to hurt you. It's just going to move it
Right.
outside. And people don't even want to take care of themselves, let alone something that's
Mhm.
not them. And that's the weirdest thing, because in this society that seems so self-absorbed, it's not too hard to just take the little extra step to not be so much, you know?
Yeah, I think I guess it helps bring it around, and it's important to remember that even the scary spider or the scary beetle that's on your bag or whatever it is, you're basically saying kill this because it exists. Kill this because it was at the wrong place at the wrong time. When in reality, this animal's this big and you're way scarier to them, trust me. Um, I saw something the other day that was like, I took the most powerful weapon it was, and it was just a piece of paper and a cup, and I moved it outside. Because, those guys are the ones killing the mosquitoes, and everybody's a part of the food chain. So, even the snakes that no one loves, they're the reasons you don't have rodents in your house. So be a little nicer to them.
Remember that? That's what my grandfather told me. He was like, "Don't kill a snake."
Yeah.
He's like, "They keep the mice out of our house." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Okay, well, what about having a snake under the house? That's a little bit scary." He goes, "Does it bother you?" And I say, "No. I mean, knowing it's there." He's like, "But why? It's not going to attack you." And I was like, "Very true. Very
Yeah.
true." But I wanted to be a
Wise man.
designer.
Yeah.
And he told me I was gay. He was
almost wise man. Sorry.
partially there. But
Yeah.
look, it's been awesome having you back on the podcast. Where can people
Yeah.
find your Instagram, Facebook, anywhere where people can? Do you have anything to promote, like a conservation, like your zoo, for instance, or where you work?
So I work at Turtle Bay Exploration Park in Redding, California. You guys can find me on Instagram at The Adventures of Jonelle, and you can see in the bottom corner, it's Jonelle, spelled very weird, but pronounced normal. And I do have a Facebook, Jonelle Meyer, so you guys are welcome to find me on any of those things. Ask questions away. I'm constantly posting fun animal things, so hopefully any way that I can help anybody out, that's kind of the dream. I get really random questions sometimes. I got one the other day from somebody who isn't even following me, but asked how he can make his turtle stay in his lap longer. And I was like, I don't know what kind of magician you think I am, but
How can I make my turtle stay in my what? Okay.
yeah.
That's like a question Google would get. Like,
Yeah.
like you ever just type in
Yeah.
like why would, and then it just pops up like a million different things. You're like, oh my
Yes.
God.
Yeah. So even the weird questions are welcome, but that's basically all I got. Instagram and Facebook.
I'm about to say, careful with my audience. You will get some very weird questions. But
I'm up for the
seriously,
challenge.
it's been great talking with you again. And I
Yeah.
appreciate everyone listening to this episode of Out of the Blank podcast.